Hi everyone, this is chapter 10, which is about leadership. This is a really interesting chapter. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. We'll get started by defining leadership. The textbook defines leadership as the process of influencing the way others act, their perceptions, and how they view their environment through cooperation. This is done through cooperation. Leadership emergence is whether someone's perceived as a leader within a work group, but leadership effectiveness is what the leader actually accomplishes. Often these two don't match up. Sometimes in any type of work group, people will perceive somebody to be a leader even if they're not doing anything effectively as a leader. Power is defined as the ability to influence or control the behavior of others. And as you'll see, you can't really have much leadership effectiveness without power. Could you imagine trying to lead a group of others if you didn't actually have any power over them? It's a lot harder. French and Raven, back in 1959, actually pioneered work in the area of power. This is when the research started on power and still continues today. We'll now discuss the types of power. Although this is the last we'll talk about the different types of power. We don't really talk about them in relation to the leadership theories in this chapter. Coercive power is the ability to use force to gain compliance from another. Expert power is when you use your unique and respected knowledge to influence others. And information power is where you use your unique knowledge to make decisions or get things done. Legitimate power is power that comes from being elected, selected, or appointed to a position of authority. Referent power is power that comes from possessing positive affect and liking. When people like you, you have more power over them. And finally, reward power is power that is the use of the right to offer desired incentives, when you can use rewards, right? Incentives or rewards to gain power. Now we'll discuss personality and leadership, although research has found that it isn't all that important. There is a relationship there. The trait approach to leadership is the approach of identifying a limited number of traits that would predict leadership emergence and effectiveness. So when this research was being done, they were trying to figure out which personality traits were related to being perceived as a leader and which were related to being effective as a leader. They found that extroversion was the most related to leadership ability, and then conscientiousness. I took this screenshot from the textbook because I enjoy this example. I think it's a good example. I'll read it to you. It says, even though there seems to be an extroversion advantage to leadership, the advantage is not so large as to be insurmountable. There are plenty of introverted CEOs, perhaps most notably the person who revolutionized how many people relate to each other, the founder and CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. So as we mentioned, extroversion is very important to be a leader. Mark Zuckerberg would probably not score very high on a scale of extroversion, yet obviously he's a good leader with the amount of influence he has and the amount of money he makes. So this is just one example of an exception, but basically the research found that the traits that are stable, your personality, are not that highly related to your ability to be a leader. We'll talk about, but there is one thing that is related, and that is intelligence. However, what's more important is how people perceive your intelligence as opposed to how intelligent somebody actually is. Let's talk for a moment about implicit leadership theories, ILTs. ILTs are the prototypes of leaders that we have in our mind. As we'll discuss later, many of us think of a white male when we think of a leader. Pretty much everybody thinks of intelligence when they think of a leader. Part of almost everybody or everybody's ILT is that the leader should be intelligent. Different people and different cultures have different components of this ILT, but the real consistent part is intelligence. However, what's really interesting is that being perceived as intelligent, this perception is more highly correlated with good leadership performance than actual intelligence scores. Both are correlated, both are important, but how smart people think you are is more highly correlated with your leadership abilities than how smart you actually are. Let's discuss gender and leadership for a moment. You've probably heard of the glass ceiling, which is a discriminatory barrier that prevents women from advancing to senior management. Women are very underrepresented in leadership, in management. There are very few female CEOs compared to the fact that women make up about half of the population. They don't make up nearly half of the CEO population. In the past, people had the mindset that males make better managers. Part of their ILT, like I mentioned, was male. This mindset was called think manager, think male. Now we've shifted to a new mindset, think manager, think female. But of course, we're not totally there yet. So who do we think make the best managers? In fact, research shows that we think both males and females can be the best managers, depending on the organization and the person's leadership style. In fact, sometimes we assume that if a female has acquired a position of management, that she must be very capable and she must be good at this. This is called the extra competence mindset, where it's actually harder for women to get promoted, so we assume that they must be really competent to have made it, and often this assumption is correct. So gender differences in leadership, the actual real gender differences, the abilities of males versus females to lead, very small, probably hardly any differences at all. And if there is a difference, technically it would put women at an advantage, make females better leaders. So what explains the underrepresentation of women in high-level positions? Well, research has shown that managers perceive female employees as experiencing greater conflict between their jobs and families. So even when the workers themselves or their coworkers don't see them as having greater conflict, managers often see female workers as having a greater work-life conflict and therefore making poorer managers. Also, women are liked less and treated worse, which makes it harder for them to be effective managers. Even if the same skills are there, the same training is there, if their team doesn't like them and doesn't respect them, the job is a lot harder for a female than for a male who is liked and respected by his team. Finally, something called the glass cliff is where females are actually given basically jobs as CEOs on a sinking ship. Females are seen as desirable CEOs for companies facing bankruptcy. They know they're on their way out anyway. And in fact, women are overrepresented in top leadership positions that are risky and fragile. Companies that are about to go out of business often promote women to become CEOs. This is called the glass cliff. I know there's quite a bit of information here on gender and leadership. There's also a really good TED Talk video that I'm going to post. So we'll talk about that another time. Now we'll discuss race and leadership, another important issue, leading us back to that issue of those ILTs where in people's minds they often, when they hear manager or leader or supervisor, they assume white male. We just talked about gender, now we'll discuss race. Black people make up only about 1% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. I looked up more recent statistics because our book was written a couple years ago. This year in 2020, 5 out of the 500 Fortune 500 CEOs are black, despite the fact that black people make up more than 13% of the US population. So 13% of the population, but only 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs. In all, there have only been 8 black CEOs on the Fortune 500 list all the way since 1999. And the highest year, was when there were 6 in 2012. As you can see, black people and in general people of color, Asian people are underrepresented in leadership positions of authority in the business world. One study found that being white appears to be part of our leadership prototypes, like I mentioned, those ILTs. Another study found that subjects gave higher leadership ratings to the person described when they thought they were rating a Caucasian opposed to an Asian leader. So people were told descriptions of different leaders and told to give them ratings of how effective they thought their leadership was. And when the person was Caucasian, they got higher scores than when they were Asian. This shows this implicit bias that people have that can result in underrepresentation. Intersectionality is defined as how different aspects of a person's identity combine in different ways to shape their reality. Intersectionality in this case means race and gender, possibly age, intersecting. So, for example, leadership ratings in a study in 2012, the leadership ratings were the highest when the leader was described as a Caucasian male, and the lowest for an African American female, right? This is the intersectionality of race and gender, causing more privilege or more or less privilege. All right, let's move on to the leadership theories now. We're going to first talk about the behavioral approach. So before we even discuss the gender and race stuff, we were talking about the trait approach to leadership, that it was sort of an innate personality issue. But as I mentioned, the research found that that wasn't really true, that the trait approach wasn't that important, it wasn't that effective. So researchers moved to the behavioral approach. What do leaders do? The behavioral approach attempts to identify the leader behaviors and moves away from the field of thinking about innate traits, and posited or found that behaviors are much more important than traits. What you actually do is more important than what you're born with. So the behavioral approach to leadership is defined as the leadership approach that attempted to identify the behaviors that distinguished between effective and ineffective leaders, right? What makes you a good or a bad leader? Let's look at the behaviors. They found that there are two types of behaviors. There are initiating structure behaviors, which are task-oriented, focused on the actual job or task, clarifying people's roles in the group, ensuring that the employees are performing, communicating the standards of performance, all of this sort of nitty-gritty task-oriented stuff. That's initiating structure. Then there's consideration, which is more of a social or relational behavior. Leaders engage in these relational behaviors, such as looking out for the well-being of their team members, being approachable, being a good listener, giving people individual attention. It's more of the social aspect as opposed to the technical job aspect. And finally, that leads us to the contingency approach to leadership, which we're going to talk about in a moment. These theories specify the situational factors affecting when different leadership behaviors and styles are more appropriate. So as you'll see, there's sometimes when it's better to be more task-oriented as a leader, and sometimes where it's better to be more worker or relational-oriented. All right, we're defining contingency theories again because it's really important. As the researchers were working on their studies of leadership behaviors, they realized that the effectiveness of these behaviors and the appropriateness of these behaviors really depend on the environment, the situation, the work environment. So contingency theories are theories which attempt to match the leadership behaviors with a particular configuration of situational factors. And the first model to do this was Fiedler's model in 1964. His model says that leadership effectiveness depends on the match between the behavior of the leader and the characteristics of the situation. And like we just talked about, he mentions task-oriented or relation-oriented behaviors that a leader can take. And the way that it was measured, the way that Fiedler's research measured whether a leader was more task-oriented or more relationship-oriented was through something called the Least Preferred Coworker Scale, or LPC. This is a questionnaire where a leader answers questions about the person that they don't like working with, the person that they dislike working with the most. And basically, if they show that they can still say nice things about the person they work with, then they're probably the relationship-oriented kind. But if they don't really say nice things about someone who's hard to work with, they're probably the task-oriented kind. So Fiedler also looked at the different contexts of the different components of the context. So first we look at the type of leader we have. We use the LPC to measure, are they task-oriented or relationship-oriented? Then we look at the situation and we want to match those leadership behaviors with the right situations. So if you can look at, I know the chart is really small. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. No, it on, let me zoom. Okay. The chart is showing that there are different components of a situation. There's leader-follower relations, how well the leader and his team members get along. These can range from poor to great. Structure of the task, is it structured or unstructured? And power of the leader, weak or strong. And these components combine to create either a favorable, unfavorable, or medium context or situation. And the research found that when the overall context is either favorable or unfavorable, either really good or really bad, it's better to be task-oriented. But when it's right in the middle, it's better to be relationship-oriented. This was the first theory to formulate a key role of fitting the leader into the situation. So it was the first theory that actually sort of measured what the situation was, measured what kind of leader the person was, and figured out if they would be a good match or not. We can also have leaders use specific types of behaviors, task-oriented or relationship-oriented, in order to match the context, right? So again, unfavorable and favorable, both ends of the spectrum in terms of context. If the work situation is really good or really bad, it's best for the leader to be task-oriented, focused on the job. But if we're in that big middle situation where some things are good and some things are bad, or everything's kind of medium, it's better to be relationship-oriented and work on empowering the workers and building those relationships. Let's move on to another contingency leadership theory. This one's called the path goal theory. I like this one. It says that the leader's job is to identify the roadblocks in the way of his subordinates that prevent them from reaching their goals, and to ensure that goal accomplishment is rewarding. So basically they're saying that the leader's job is to help the team members when they encounter roadblocks, and to make sure that when they get to their goal, it's worth it. So this sort of reminds us of how we discussed in a previous chapter, expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. That's, can you reach your goal? If you do, will it get you a reward? And is it a reward that you like and you want? And the goal of the leader is to really create that path and that goal. Clear the path for their workers to get to their end point and make that end point a good one. That's the path goal theory. In this theory, we also discuss 4 types of leadership. And I like these this differentiation, how they discuss these here. They talk about supportive leadership, providing a friendly and communicative atmosphere. We can think of supportive leadership as the cheerleader. Next, there's participative leadership, consulting with employees and involving them in decision-making, getting them to participate with you. This is more like a facilitator relationship, everybody working together, participating together. Third is the directive leadership. This is more of a commander or authoritarian style, clarifying the role expectations, coordinating the work, kind of just being a boss. But it's not a bad thing. It depends on the situation. And finally, achievement-oriented leadership. This is more of a coach, setting goals for subordinates and motivating them to meet these challenging goals. 4 different types of leadership. One is not better than the other. Remember, contingency theories mean that the type of leadership needs to match the environment or needs to match the situation. It is contingent on the situation or the context. So as you can see in the black arrow on the bottom right corner, whether a leader is more useful to their team as a commander, cheerleader, facilitator, or coach will depend on the subordinates, the tasks, and the work group characteristics. The best style will be the one that delivers what employees need. So it depends on the situation, right? It depends on the type of people in your group, the tasks that you need to work on, and how people are getting along with each other in the group. All right, one more contingency theory. This one is called Vroom's normative model of leadership. The chart looks really confusing, but it's actually kind of fun. I should have made it so I could draw on the screen, but that's okay. This theory asks who should make the decisions. And in fact, it depends on the context. That's why it's called a contingency theory. Vroom developed this system to choose the right type of decision making. So when a leader needs to make a decision for everybody, there are 5 different ways that they can make this decision. They can decide it themselves. They can facilitate a discussion or a decision with everybody all together. They can consult the whole group and then make the decision themselves. They can consult people individually and then make the decision themselves. Or they could completely delegate the decision making to somebody else. So there are 5 different ways to do it. Do it yourself, do it all together, consult the group, consult individuals, or let somebody else do it, delegate. And using this little flow chart allows you to figure out which is the best method of decision making. Which one should you do? So you answer questions like, is this decision significant? Is it a long commitment or an important commitment once the decision has been made? Does the leader have expertise in this area? What is the likelihood of the people in their group agreeing with their decision? What is the goal alignment between the organization and the workers? The group expertise, how much do the workers know about this decision that's being made? And then general team competence. All of these things can be ranked as high or low, and you follow the flow chart along to find out which method of decision making should be used. There is a good example in the textbook. If you would like to go through an example, feel free to check it out in the textbook. All right, now we're going to move away from the contingency theories that specifically talk about the interaction between leadership behaviors and the context. We're going to move to some contemporary leadership theories, some newer stuff that, of course, is still contingent on the context, but they're just our newer theories, not necessarily contingency theories. The first one is called transformational leadership theory. This defines transformational leadership as opposed to transactional leadership. Transformational leadership is characterized by idealized influence, also called charisma. We'll talk about that in a moment. Inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. A transformational leader really wants to transform their workers into the type of workers and group members, team members that they want them and need them to be. They work on really transforming the workers. A transactional leader is a leader who demonstrates contingent rewards, active management by exception, passive management by exception, and laissez-faire leadership styles. I'll talk about what all those things mean in a moment, but in general, a transactional leader is just getting the stuff done. They're using rewards, they're using different types of strategies and methods to just get the job done, but they're not looking at the individual. They're not trying to change the workers. They're just trying to work on the structure to get what needs to be done. And overall transformational leadership, the first one, working on transforming your team members, is better. See, we got a big star on the left-hand side next to the transformational leader. He has charisma, acting like a role model, showing conviction and emphasizing the importance of purpose. He has inspirational motivation. He shows an appealing vision, creating excitement around this vision. He has intellectual stimulation. He questions old assumptions, encourages expression of new ideas, and provides individualized consideration, treating the followers or the team members as individuals, providing support, caring about their personal development. Yay, transformational leadership. That's the best one. It's great. However, transactional leadership certainly does have its place, depending on the context or the situation. And then, as you'll see, there's a little star next to contingent rewards, because that's the one part of transactional leadership that's actually really good too. We talked about rewards, I believe, in the last chapter. And you can provide rewards or punishments based on performance while providing assistance along the way, and this has been found to be very effective. Some other things that transactional leaders do is they only jump in when they need to, or they do the laissez-faire attitude where they just leave their workers alone and don't really guide them very much, which, as you can imagine, is not a great thing for a leader. Charisma is important to be a transformational leader, as we discussed. It's the first thing mentioned in a transformational leadership definition. And charisma is defined as rare personality qualities of leaders that create high levels of devotion and enthusiasm on the part of followers. Somebody charismatic really gets people going. The textbook gives a great example of Elon Musk and how charismatic he is and can be. So read about that example in the book as well, please. Another contemporary leadership theory is called the leader-member exchange theory, or LMX theory. This chart looks kind of confusing. It's not. Employee competence, how good your employees are, employees' personality, the similarity or perceived similarity between employee and leader, the leader's behaviors, the leader's fairness, and the employee's impression of the leader. All of these things contribute to the leader-member exchange, the quality of the relationship between the leader and the follower. So on the left-hand side are the list of things that contribute to this quality of relationship. In the green box, you'll see that a high-quality LMX relationship is characterized by high levels of trust, mutual liking, professional respect, and mutual obligation to not let each other down. This is a high-quality relationship. It's a good thing. Low-quality relationships, however, have lower levels of liking, loyalty, and respect. A lot of it boils down to trust, and this begins right when the employee gets hired, and this relationship between the leader and the employee or the member can result in a lot of things such as employee autonomy, how much they do their work on their own, job satisfaction, being committed to the organization and sharing values, low turnover, employees that stay for a long time, and career success. So as you can see, these are effects for both the organization and the employee. When there's high quality LMX relationship, the organization benefits, the leader benefits, the employee benefits, everybody wins. When there's low quality, everybody loses. Employees are leaving, people are not happy, the leaders have trouble leading, everything's bad when there's low quality relationships. However, some studies found that the high quality relationships really matter a lot more to introverted newcomers. If somebody's coming in and they're high on the extroversion scale, it's not as important that they have those high quality LMX relationships as it is for the introverted people. But in general, it's good to have those high quality relationships. Okie doke, let's talk about authentic leadership. We're done with the theories, and in fact, we're nearing the end of the chapter. Steve Jobs is a great example of authentic leadership. Authentic leadership says that authentic leaders are those who remain true to themselves. These leaders display self-awareness, honesty, and sincerity. Authentic leadership. In the chart, you can see things that authentic leaders do. They do remain true to themselves and have a strong sense of right and wrong. They do have awareness of their own values, strengths, and limitations. They do admit when they're wrong, and they do display honesty and sincerity. These are authentic leaders. Authentic leaders do not hide their weaknesses or shy away from showing their vulnerabilities. They do not engage in ego-defensive behaviors, and they do not pretend to be someone they're not. They're authentic, they're real. Now, this being authentic is not always the best thing, because if the person's not a great person to begin with, then being authentic to themselves might not be the greatest idea. But in general, authentic leadership is a good thing. Servant leadership is also a good thing. These are people who lead by serving their followers, helping them reach their full potential. I really like the little picture I put right under the title, where the leader is holding his hand up to help his followers make it from one side of the cliff to the other. This is exactly what servant leadership is. Servant leaders empower and develop their employees. They show humility and modesty, authenticity, as we mentioned on the previous slide. They accept others, provide direction, and serve the broader community. This is a great thing. People who are served by servant leaders become good people, better people themselves. It's really a wonderful thing. And you can also read more about servant leadership in the book. There's some examples in there as well. On the other hand, we have abusive supervision, which, as you can imagine, is not a good thing. Abusive supervision is sustained display of hostile and demeaning behaviors, excluding physical contact. So no actual physical abuse. It's emotional or psychological abuse. Examples are ridiculing employees, reminding them of personal failures or mistakes, being rude, or invading their privacy. The abuse can be passed on. In fact, an employee is more likely to be abusive at home if they're abused at work. And if the abuse is laced with discriminatory comments directed at a person's protected characteristics, remember their age, race, gender, it constitutes illegal harassment, and the boss can be fired or even charged. So, how do we cultivate good leadership? We're almost done, I promise. A good portion of our leadership abilities are innate, as we talked about that trait stuff at the beginning, the personality. And a little less than half, depending on the study, of our leadership abilities or leadership behaviors are influenced by our innate traits, our things that we were born with, our nature. But more than half, the rest of it can be influenced by our environment or our training. So, how do we cultivate good leadership? Let's focus on this more than half that we can affect. First of all, we have 360 feedback. As you'll remember from previous chapters, that's when everybody in the workplace is giving you feedback. There's coaching, mentoring. Then developmental assignments. This is when the manager will carefully craft a job assignment to provide the useful experience needed to be a leader. So if I'm going to promote one of my employees to a leadership position, before I do that, I may give them an overseas assignment or a specific team assignment that I think will prepare them for the upcoming leadership experience. It's a specific targeted job assignment as used sort of like training. And then there's formal leadership training, where this is not just a job assignment, but real off-the-job training, which can be done in a classroom or online. This is used by about 80% of businesses doing leadership training, and it's been found to be quite effective. All right, last slide before our review. New directions for leadership. We'll talk about the GLOBE project real quick. The Global Leadership and Organizational Behavioral Effectiveness Project, which the acronym is GLOBE project. It's a collaboration of over 62 countries with over 170 scholars working from those 62 countries. They analyzed results from over 15,000 middle managers from 60 different countries and found that the characteristics associated with transformational leadership, remember transformational leadership is transforming your workers to become the kind of workers you need them to be. Some of these traits or characteristics include having foresight, being trustworthy, dynamic, confidence builder. These things are universally endorsed. Whichever culture or country you go to, being trustworthy and being a confidence builder, that's considered a good thing as a leader. However, other characteristics, such as being a risk taker or self-sacrificing or being compassionate, these things depend on the culture. So in some cultures with more power distance or lower power distance, these things might be seen as good or bad depending on the culture. However, there are also leader attributes that are universally undesirable, such as being a loner or being irritable. So a lot of things are universal across all 60 countries that they looked in, but some things depend on the culture or the society. And cultures with higher power distance view unequal distribution of power to be relatively more acceptable. Higher power distance is when the leader is supposed to have a lot more power than the employees. Employees would not have a problem with their manager getting a special parking spot outside or driving a nicer car than they do because they expect this. Whereas in countries with low power distance, such as Scandinavian countries, the managers are really seen as like on the same level as their employees, and people might find it strange or have a problem with their manager driving a much nicer car than them and parking in a reserved parking stall. So power distance is something that varies between cultures, but a lot of things stay the same. Time for our summary. I do apologize that it is so long and so tiny. There are a lot of important definitions in this chapter. I will try and go through it nice and quick, starting with the definition of leadership. Leadership is the process of influencing the way others act, their perceptions, and how they view their environment through cooperation. Leadership emergence is whether someone is perceived as a leader. Leadership effectiveness is what the leader actually accomplishes or does. Power is the ability to influence or control the behavior of others, first studied in 1959 by French and Raven. Different types of power are coercive power, using force to gain compliance, expert power, using your unique knowledge to influence others, information power, using your unique knowledge to make decisions, legitimate power, power that comes from being elected or appointed, referent power comes from being liked by others, and reward power, having the right to offer desired incentives or rewards to gain power. All those types of power are in that little parentheses thing there. The trait approach to leadership is the approach of identifying a limited number of traits that would predict leadership emergence and effectiveness. The FFM factors correlated with leadership are extroversion is the first, the most correlated, followed by conscientiousness. But we found that the trait approach to leadership wasn't really enough. The traits only explain a small part of somebody's leadership abilities. ILTs, or implicit leadership theories, are the prototypes of leaders we have in our mind. When someone says there's a manager or a leader, what do you think of? What are they like? What do they look like? What do they act like? What do they sound like? All of this prototype is your ILT. The glass ceiling is a discriminatory barrier that prevents women from advancing to senior management. This is affected by the fact that so many people's ILTs involve being a male to be a leader. The glass cliff is the issue that women are overrepresented in top leadership positions that are risky or fragile. Women are often put in charge of a business that is already failing or on its way out. People of color are underrepresented in leadership positions. Many studies have shown that Caucasian managers are given higher ratings, are perceived more favorably, and Black people still only represent about 1% of the Fortune 500 CEOs. The behavioral approach to leadership tells us that behaviors distinguish between effective and ineffective leaders. We identify these different types of behaviors, and research found that behavior is more important than traits when it comes to leadership effectiveness and emergence. Initiating structure are task-oriented behaviors that leaders display, whereas consideration are relational behaviors that leaders display, task-oriented versus social or relational-oriented. Contingency approach to leadership tells us that there is an interaction between a leader's characteristics and the environment or situation they're leading in. This was a big step for leadership research, understanding that there is an interaction between the leader's characteristics and behaviors and the environment that they're leading in. Over to the right-hand side, we're halfway there. Fiedler's contingency model was the first to posit that leadership effectiveness depends on the match between the behavior of the leader and the characteristics of the situation. So his was the first contingency theory. He found that when the overall context is either favorable or unfavorable, task-oriented leaders do better. But when that overall context is moderate, not really good or really bad, it's better to have relationship-oriented leaders. Another contingency theory is the path-goal theory, which states that it's a leader's job to increase the expectancy, instrumentality, and valence for their followers. So they want to clear the path for the followers to get to their goal and make sure that that goal is a good one. And it's something that they want to achieve. Supportive leadership is more like a cheerleader. Participative leadership is a facilitator where you work together. Directive leadership, more like a commander, a more authoritarian style. And achievement-oriented leadership is more like a coach who sets a specific goal and helps his followers get there. The next contingency model is Vroom's normative model of leadership. This one is that tricky flowchart, not tricky, but complicated looking flowchart that helps us choose the right type of decision making. Does the leader decide himself? Does he facilitate the decision? Does he consult individuals, consult the group, or delegate the decision making responsibility? And this is decided by a flowchart which asks questions about this decision. How important the decision is, how long the commitment is, how much expertise the leader has and the group members have, all those questions there. It's actually quite a cool chart. All right, done with Vroom. Transformational leadership is characterized by charisma, motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Remember, this is where the leader tries to transform the team to being able to reach their goals. Whereas a transactional leader is more about rewards, laissez-faire, leaving the group to do it on their own and only intervening when there's a problem or when someone needs something, or sometimes not intervening at all if it's really a laissez-faire style. And normally transformational is better than transactional, but the reward part of the transactional leadership can be very good. Charisma, which is one of the most important traits of being a transformational leader, is defined as rare personality qualities of leaders that create high levels of devotion and enthusiasm on the part of the followers. The next theory is about the high quality and low quality LMX relationships, the leader and the member relationships. If there's a high quality relationship, that means there's high levels of trust, mutual liking, professional respect, and mutual obligation to not let each other down. This is a good thing and leads to high employee satisfaction, employees staying for a long time, sharing values with the organization, all that good stuff. Low quality LMX relationships have low levels of liking, loyalty, and respect, and obviously are not a great thing. Although in general, we found that it's more important for introverted workers to have that high quality relationship, but it's good for everyone. Authentic leadership is a leader who remains true to themselves, displays self-awareness, honesty, and sincerity. Remember, that was our example was Steve Jobs. A servant leader, those who lead by serving their followers and helping them reach their full potential. Abusive supervision is a sustained display of hostile and demeaning behaviors, but excludes physical contact. And then we talk about ways to foster or increase good leadership skills. One is with developmental assignments, carefully crafted job assignments that provide useful experience, and formal leadership training, off-the-job training in a classroom or online setting. Of course, 360 feedback is important, as well as coaching and mentoring in order to foster good leadership. I think that is it. Be sure to read the chapter in the book, review these slides. This summary slide is very important, and I will see you all shortly in the video for chapter 11. Have a great day.